8 hostages held by Hamas in the Gaza Strip have been released as part of a 6-week ceasefire deal which remains in effect. They include a female Israeli soldier, an 80-year-old Israeli man and 5 Thai nationals. Now, scenes of chaos unfolded in the Gaza Strip earlier as 7 hostages were handed over to the Red Cross. That chaos prompted a swift response from Israeli officials, with the country's prime minister delaying the planned release of dozens of Palestinian prisoners, which was due to take place this Thursday.
After 482 days in captivity, 3 Israeli citizens and 5 Thai nationals are handed over to the Red Cross by Hamas. The first hostage released, 20-year-old Israeli soldier Agam Berger, who was abducted along with 4 other female soldiers who were freed on Saturday. Hamas turned the hostage releases into scenes of propaganda, parading Berger on a stage before handing her to the Red Cross in the northern refugee camp of Jabalia. The 7 civilians were released later on Thursday in the southern city of Han Yunis, in front of the destroyed home of slain Hamas leader Yahya Sinwar. It was a chaotic scene. Palestinians surrounded and shouted at the hostages as they were led to Red Cross vehicles. 29-year-old Arbel Yehoud and 80-year-old Gadi Moses were turned over, along with 5 Thai nationals. They are foreign workers who were taken captive in the October 7th attack. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu criticized Hamas's setup of the handover, calling it a shocking scene and further proof of Hamas's cruelty. But there were still celebrations and tears of joy across Israel. At the hostages' square in Tel Aviv, Israelis were singing, dancing, and popping champagne. All 8 hostages were taken to Israel for medical assessments and to be reunited with loved ones. According to the ceasefire deal that began on January 19th, a total of 33 hostages should be freed during the agreement's initial 6 weeks, in exchange for nearly 2,000 Palestinian prisoners.
We can now bring in Gershon Baskin, a former Israeli hostage negotiator who joins us from Tel Aviv. Good afternoon. Thank you so much for joining us on the program today. Now, we clearly saw those chaotic scenes unfold in Gaza as those Israeli hostages were being released. Hamas clearly eager to show it's in control in the enclave. What do you make of what we saw?
What we saw was chaos caused by both Hamas and Islamic Jihad being responsible for the 2 hostages who were released there in Khan Yunis. The earlier release we saw, which was only Hamas, was very orderly. It was a Hollywood production with directors directing the traffic and controlling the movement of people, and many, many armed combatants there taking control. Later in the day, it was chaotic. It was not done in a secured location. It was done at the symbolic site of the home that no longer exists, that belonged to Yahya Sinwar. And you can see in these pictures the thousands of people who were gathered there. It's amazing that the hostages made it out there safely.
So you're saying that we saw those scenes of chaos because Islamic Jihad was involved this time around?
I think it was because there wasn't one group that was involved by itself. You see in the pictures the green flags of Hamas and the black flags of Islamic Jihad. There were Hamas soldiers who you see the green ribbons around their head, and the Islamic Jihad soldiers who were wearing helmets and black uniforms. It was clear that no one group was in charge, and that was the resulting chaos that we see here.
Israel says it's suspending the release of Palestinian prisoners. What does this mean? Is that ceasefire deal in jeopardy?
No, I already saw an announcement that the release will take place at 5 o'clock this evening, Israel time, so I think the release will take place. Israel's not going to break down the deal over what happened this morning. They sent their protest to Egypt and to Qatar and to the United States, and hopefully the Qataris and the Egyptians mainly will be able to make sure that the next release, which is scheduled to take place on Saturday, will be more orderly and less chaotic, and that the hostages will come home safely. 3 hostages are supposed to be released on Saturday, a total of 33 hostages in the first 42 days, and expecting that 8 of the 33 are not alive.
Now, Gershon, you've negotiations for phase 2 of the ceasefire deal are set to take place on day 16 of the current ceasefire deal, I believe. Have those negotiations started? And if they haven't started, what are the sticking points?
They're going to start on Tuesday. If they've been talking unofficially so far. The main sticking points are that the war in phase 2 in the second 42 days is supposed to come to a final end, and there's supposed to be an Israeli withdrawal from Gaza. This is going to lead us to a collision course between Netanyahu and his government coalition partners and President Trump, if President Trump maintains his firmness that this deal must be implemented to the end, because Netanyahu's coalition partners, Smotrich, the finance minister, has threatened to bolt the coalition if the deal goes through, if the war ends, if Israel does not renew the fighting. And at the day 16th, when these negotiations are supposed to begin and to conclude by day 30, Netanyahu will be in Washington meeting with President Trump, the first foreign leader to meet President Trump since his inauguration. And we don't know what Trump's message will be, but it has been until now that this deal must go through to complete itself into stage 2 and then into stage 3 of reconstruction of Gaza.
With Netanyahu facing domestic resistance when it comes to negotiating phase 2 of this deal, does Steve Witkoff, who's Donald Trump's Middle East envoy, does his presence in Israel sort of arm twist Netanyahu in a way?
I think it does. Witkoff is here today. He was in Hostage Square today. He's meeting with Netanyahu later today. He visited Gaza yesterday with one of the Israeli ministers, and his message so far has been to Netanyahu that the president wants to see this deal go through. And it's very clear that Witkoff speaks with the authority of President Trump. But we know that President Trump can be unpredictable. We know that his messages have been varied. He's talked about real estate development in Gaza and moving 1.5 million Gazans out of Gaza to neighboring Arab states who have said absolutely no, that's a non-starter, that cannot happen. So it's very fragile right now. I think that Netanyahu, knowing the kind of leader he is and the kind of leadership he's provided, will look for some kind of provocation that will lead to Hamas breaching the deal, and then he'll have an excuse not to go into phase 2. But we still have tens of Israeli hostages being held in Gaza, and the public wants them home.
I want to ask about Donald Trump's statements, because clearly this is not candidate Trump anymore who's making such outlandish statements, but in fact the U.S. president. You say it's a non-starter. It's a non-starter for not just the Arab world, but for the wider international community and at large. Does this kind of rhetoric from the U.S. president hurt the negotiations, or is this a strategy?
We don't know how serious he is about those comments about relocating Palestinians out of Gaza. He said it could be temporary, it could be permanent. We know that no country around the region is going to accept them. And if Donald Trump wants to be so magnanimous on behalf of Arab countries like Jordan and Egypt, I would suggest that he open up the doors of the United States to Palestinians from Gaza who might want to seek refuge in the United States, while Donald Trump is planning to move millions of illegal immigrants from the United States out to their home country. So I think that we have a double talk here that's not acceptable. It doesn't hurt. I'm not sure that it will prevent negotiations from moving forward. But the real focus of the international community, led by the United States, needs to be the day after in Gaza, of replacing the Hamas leadership with an acceptable Palestinian leadership that can govern Gaza and can also be acceptable to the international community to accept money, the many billions of dollars that will be necessary to rebuild Gaza.
You mentioned how Hamas has staged these Hollywood-like productions when they, orchestrate these ceasefire, these hostage releases. Of course, not today. We didn't see that today. But we've also seen Hamas police officers get back on the streets of Gaza in their blue police uniforms. They're clearly want to show that they are in control in the Gaza Strip and that they have not been weakened. Do you feel that they have been weakened?
They have certainly been weakened. This is very clear. And many of those blue police are 16, 17-year-old kids who have been given $100 or $200, a uniform and a gun, to be out there on the street. And believe me, the hundreds of thousands of Palestinians, millions of Palestinians who are struggling to survive, who don't know where their next meal is coming from, will gladly take that money without being ideologically affiliated with Hamas. The problem is that there is no alternative put on the table to replace Hamas. I spoke with a friend in Gaza yesterday who said one of these people who returned to the north to find that their home home is no longer there, their neighborhood is no longer there. I asked him, are you Palestinians now going to rebel against Hamas? And his response was, we have no alternative right now. Who do you want us to rebel against Hamas in favor of? It's suicide for us to stand up against Hamas when there is no viable alternative on the table right now.
So a revamped Palestinian Authority is not a possibility, you think?
Well, it is, but it cannot be led by Mahmoud Abbas, the 90-year-old Hamas Palestinian Authority leader, who's in the 19th year of a 4-year term and enjoys almost no legitimacy on the Palestinian street. But he is the legal authority. He needs to be able to appoint someone who would be a temporary governor over the Gaza Strip, who would form a government, a civilian, professional, technocratic-based government made up of Palestinians, who could then invite troops to come from neighboring Arab countries to serve as a stabilizing force in Gaza and to accept international money for the reconstruction. But I can't see how the Palestinian Authority, as it's currently constructed under the leadership of Mahmoud Abbas, to be able to enter Gaza and govern there.
But you say that no serious country will pour in their money into rebuilding Gaza with Hamas in power. How do you get Hamas to loosen their grip then?
Hamas has said over and over again that they're willing to give up governance in Gaza. They're not so willing to give up their guns, and that's a problem. But the Egyptians have been negotiating with Palestinian factions and have arrived at various solutions for a governing council in Gaza that Hamas would not be part of. That needs to be pursued. So far, Mahmoud Abbas has said that he doesn't agree to it, and only the Palestinian Authority can rule there. So there needs to be the United States and the Saudis and the Jordanians and the Egyptians telling Mahmoud Abbas, yes, you can appoint the leader of the government in Gaza or a deputy prime minister who will govern in Gaza, whatever structure you want, but you really need to step aside and allow that government to be independent of you because you don't have a legitimacy to govern anymore.
Gershon, we've of course seen scenes of joy across Israel as these hostages, Israeli hostages, get released. But the hostages who have been released up until now have been alive. Champagne will not be popped, unfortunately, when the deceased start getting released. And obviously we talk about phase 2 and phase 3 of this deal. How does that change the dynamic?
Well, first of all, I think the pressure is going to build up in Israel as we see the releases of the live hostages and them coming home to their families. And there isn't a dry eye in the country. It will certainly be a blow when we see dead bodies come over the border and crossing into Israel. But I think in both cases will step up the pressure on Netanyahu and the government to go through with the deal. It's time for this war to end. We have to stop doing this to each other, the Israelis and the Palestinians. When the war is over, there's still 7 million Palestinians and 7 million Israeli Jews living between the Jordan River and the Mediterranean Sea. And we need leaders here who are going to direct us in a new direction, who are going to say this has to be the last war. We really have to change what we're doing.
Gershon, today we saw 5 Thai nationals who were released as well. In November 2023, we had, I believe, around 20 or 23 Thai nationals who were released. How did Thailand go about securing the release of their hostages? Were they part of these ceasefire negotiations?
Well, the Thai government has been working with the Egyptians and the Qataris mainly in trying to appeal to Hamas to release them for a very long time. It's unreasonable that these Thai workers who have nothing to do with the conflict have been held hostage for 482 days. It makes no sense why Hamas didn't release them immediately after taking them hostage on October 7, 2023. It's something that's incomprehensible why they've been held hostage all this time.
And you say that the Palestinian prisoners are going to be released within the next hour or so, that those who have been detained in Israeli prisoners. Can you talk us through who are some of the main, heavy names, the most controversial of these prisoners who are going to be released?
Right. There are going to be more than 30 released who are serving life sentences for killing Israelis. There are amongst them people who are responsible for the death of tens of Israelis and serving 40 or 50 life sentences. They are symbols of the Palestinian struggle. From what happened in the previous releases, the most serious people serving life sentences will probably be deported through Egypt and then to other countries. That's what we've seen already. I think 70 life sentence prisoners have already been deported from Palestine to Egypt and then going to Turkey or Qatar or maybe Iran or Algeria. I don't know which countries they're going to go to. They won't stay in Egypt probably, and they won't be allowed to stay in Gaza or in the West Bank.
And how does Israel ensure that these prisoners don't come back to hurt them in the future?
The only way that Israel can do that is making sure that they can work with the countries that are accepting them and making sure that they are not engaged in terrorism. And we all know that Israel has a long track record of going after people in other countries in the world who have committed terrorist attacks against Israelis. We saw this happen after the Munich massacre at the Olympics. Everyone who was responsible for that was assassinated by Israel. So Israel's ability to assassinate Ismail Haniyeh, the Hamas leader, in the headquarters of the guest house of the revolutionary guards of the Iranians in the center of Tehran. So the long arm of Israel knows how to reach people who endanger Israel. Unfortunately, Israel didn't know how to protect itself back on October 7th, 2023.
Indeed. Gershon Baskin, thank you so much for joining us on the program today.
Thank you.